The cloud-level ballroom of Cross International Group had been booked out for the entire night. A crystal chandelier hung from a 12-meter-high ceiling, refracting light onto a sea of champagne flutes below, so dazzling it made one's eyes ache. Up front, the LED screen stretched a full 20 meters wide, scrolling a line of gilded text, warmly celebrating the successful signing of the Cross International Group $100 billion strategic partnership. In below, in smaller type, were the names of the signing parties. One of them, listed as chief negotiator, bore my name, Lucas Adler. But at that moment, no one was looking at me. Every gaze in the room was fixed on the woman standing on stage in a champagne-colored haute couture gown. Sarah Whitmore, wife of Cross International Group's CEO Dominic Cross, and the evening's MC. She stood bathed in the spotlight, her hair pinned up impeccably, the diamond teardrop earrings on her ears flashing blindingly. When she smiled, the curve of her lips was as precisely measured as if drawn with a ruler. "Thank you, distinguished guests, for gracing Cross International with your presence tonight." Sarah held the microphone, her voice gentle and polished, laced with an innate sense of superiority. "The signing of this $100 billion deal marks a milestone in the group's history. None of this would have been possible without my husband Dominic Cross's brilliant leadership, nor without the tireless dedication of every member of the team." Applause rippled through the room. I stood near the back of the ballroom, a glass of champagne in my hand, untouched. Beside me stood several brothers from the marketing department who had ground alongside me for the better part of a year. They weren't drinking either, every one of them looking grim, because everyone in that room knew exactly who had landed this deal. I did. Lucas Adler, from initial outreach last December to the final signing this November 11, whole months, 37 international flights, over 400 sleepless nights, and finally, 3 straight days of grinding negotiations in New York, where the deal collapsed twice and was resurrected twice. By the time the contracts were signed, I had dropped a solid £15 out of the 13 people on the project team. My personal contribution to the revenue accounted for a full 93%. But in Sarah's mouth, all of that had been reduced to Dominic's brilliant leadership and the team's tireless dedication. Fine, I never expected her to give me any credit anyway. From the day I joined Cross International 3 years ago, Sarah had never once looked me in the eye. In her world, I was nothing more than an employee, less than an ant compared to the high society wives in her social circle. Tonight, we must extend a special thanks to one person in particular. Sarah pivoted, her gaze sailing over the crowd and landing on a man in the front row. "Justin Caldwell, please come up to the stage." My hand stopped mid-air. Justin rose from his seat, draped in a navy blue Armani suit, his hair slicked back to a greasy shine, wearing that insufferable smirk that made you want to punch him. He ambled unhurriedly onto the stage. Passing by me, he deliberately slowed his steps, shot me a sideways glance, and tugged the corner of his mouth upward. I knew that look all too well. Triumph, provocation, disdain, all mixed into one. Who was Justin, Sarah's male bestie? Her college friend with the kind of bond said to go all the way back to childhood. 3 years ago, as soon as Sarah married Dominic, she turned around and slotted Justin into Cross International's marketing department as a deputy director. $2 million a year in salary, plus a company-issued Porsche Cayenne. And in 3 years at the department, this man had never, not once, successfully brought a single project to fruition. His daily work routine consisted of rolling in at 10:30 a.m., drinking a cup of pour-over coffee, taking Sarah out for lunch at noon, and clocking out promptly at 3:30 p.m., yet no one in the company dared breathe a word of protest. Because he was Sarah's man, and Sarah was Dominic's wife, Cross International might have borne the Cross name, but everyone knew Dominic was utterly beholden to this wife of his. Whatever Sarah said went. Justin took his place on stage, accepted the microphone, and offered the audience a deeply practiced bow, his face a mask of smiling gratitude. Justin Caldwell played an irreplaceable and pivotal coordinating role in advancing this $100 billion deal. Sarah's voice projected through the ballroom's entire sound system. After careful deliberation by senior company leadership, We have decided to award Justin Caldwell a special contribution award with a bonus of $75,750 million. The ballroom fell silent for a beat, maybe two, before a sparse, scattered patter of applause broke out. Almost involuntarily, everyone turned their heads to glance in my direction, then just as quickly snapped their gazes away, as though holding eye contact for a second too long might be contagious. The faces of my marketing department brothers beside me all changed color. Tony Fisher was the first to crack. He cursed under his breath. "What the hell, is this a joke? Justin coordinated what?" The only time he ever went to the airport was to drop off his girlfriend, and he happened to run into the client. "Shut it," I clamped a hand on Tony's arm. "Don't make a scene on their turf." Tony ground his teeth, forcing the rest of his words back down his throat. On stage, Justin was delivering his acceptance speech, nattering on about gratitude to the company, thanks to Sarah's mentorship, and this is the result of the whole team's collective effort. When the word team left his lips, his gaze flicked deliberately in my direction, that smug grin practically stretching to his ears. Beside him, Sarah offered a genteel applause. The look in her eyes as she gazed at Justin was far too bright. What lay hidden in that look was something anyone with functioning eyes in that room could see clearly, but no one dared say a word. After all, she was the CEO's wife. Who would be reckless enough to gossip about the CEO's wife? And then, at last, Sarah's gaze fell upon me. "Ah, right, Lucas." Her tone had suddenly turned breezy and dismissive, as if she were summoning a lowly intern to run an errand. "You put in quite a bit of legwork on this project as well. Our company has always believed in rewarding diligence and punishing negligence. We wouldn't dream of shortchanging any employee." She took a craft paper envelope from her assistant's hand, pinched it between two fingers, and with a casual flick of the wrist, tossed it toward where I stood. The envelope wasn't sealed. In mid-flight, it flipped over, and its contents came spilling out into the air. Several red $100 bills fluttered down from mid-air, scattering across the floor at my feet. $800. I lowered my gaze to the money on the floor. It didn't move. The collective stare of the entire ballroom focused on me with laser intensity. The air grew so still, you could hear the faint electrical hum of the crystal chandelier overhead. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what I would do. Standing on stage, Sarah looked down at me from above. On her lips hung that same smile reserved for tossing alms to a beggar. "Lucas, take it. The $800 is an extra cash bonus from the company. Keep up the hard work from now on, and the company will not let you down." In her tone as she said this was even more dismissive than the one you'd use to brush off a street corner flyer peddler. Beside me, Tony's face had gone red, his fists clenched so tight, the knuckles cracked. The other veteran members of the marketing department stood grinding their jaws, the rims of their eyes reddening. They had all fought alongside me every step of the way. They knew exactly what I had sacrificed for this deal. Last December, when I was pulling consecutive all-nighters until 3 a.m., Sarah had been vacationing in the Maldives. When I was hospitalized with a bleeding ulcer from the sheer pressure of the negotiations, Justin had been escorting her down Rodeo Drive, and now she was giving Justin $7.5 million and meat $100. I crouched down. In one by one, I picked up the bills from the floor. 8 bills, crisp and brand new, not so much as a single crease on them. Carefully, deliberately, I stacked them and tucked them into the pocket of my suit jacket. "Lucas, glad to see you're accepting it graciously," Sarah continued from onstage, the triumph in her voice now barely concealed. "I said it before. Whatever the company gives you, just take it. No need to feel embarrassed." I cut her off, not with words, with actions. From the inner pocket of my suit jacket, I withdrew a white envelope. It was the resignation letter I had already printed out the day before. Originally, I had planned to wait until the banquet was over, then hand it in with dignity, tee up my remaining work, part ways on good terms. But as it turned out, Sarah Whitmore did not deserve dignity. I strode through the crowd toward the stage, unhurried. The people around me parted to clear a path. On every face was an expression of shock and anticipation, as if to say, now this is going to be good. In seeing me approach, Justin instinctively stepped forward to shield Sarah, his brow furrowed. Lucas, what do you think you're doing? If you've got something to say it from down there. Don't come up here. I didn't spare him a single glance. Inai walked up to Sarah, stopping less than a step away. Her perfume was overpoweringly pungent. Her makeup was so flawless you couldn't spot a single imperfection, but right now her eyes held a new flicker of weariness and displeasure. "Lucas, what are you doing coming up here?" Sarah asked icily. I didn't answer, raising the resignation letter right in front of her and the more than 300 people in the room. I tore it straight down the middle. The sharp, violent rip of tearing paper traveled through the microphone's pickup and echoed across every corner of the ballroom. Everyone present sucked in a collective gasp of cold air. I put the two halves together and tore them again. Then I crumpled the shreds in my fist, wound up, and with every ounce of strength I had, hurled the wad directly into Sarah Whitmore's face. The paper ball bounced off the bridge of her nose and scattered. Shreds of paper clung to her meticulously styled hair, to her shoulders, a picture of utter, wretched disarray. Sarah froze in place as if struck by lightning. That perfectly composed smile hadn't even fully faded before shock and fury twisted it into something hideously ugly. The ballroom went absolutely silent. "Sarah," I looked her straight in the eye, my voice not loud, but every single word landing with sharp clarity in every corner of the ballroom. "For 3 years, you've hidden under the halo of Dominic's success, throwing your weight around, treating Cross International like your private slush fund to support your boy toy. Did you think the entire company was blind? Did you think everyone was afraid of you? You've lost your mind." Sarah's voice pierced the air, shrill and cracking, her face flooded with color, flushing so red it looked ready to bleed. "Security. Where is security? Throw this lunatic out. $7.5 million to a man who does nothing," I went on, my voice overpowering her shrieks. $800 to the man who carried 93% of the revenue. Sarah, you weren't insulting me. You were publicly slapping Dominic Cross in the face. Do you honestly believe Cross International reached this scale because of you and your male bestie's afternoon tea sessions? Justin's face had also changed by now. He lunged forward to grab my collar, snarling, "Lucas, don't be such an ungrateful bastard." I turned my head and looked at him. Just one look. Justin's hands froze in midair. He didn't dare lay them on me. He was half a head shorter than me, and on top of that, years of wine and women had hollowed out his body. Standing in front of me, he looked as flimsy as a bamboo pole. Inai had led teams for 3 years, faced down countless old foxes across negotiating tables. A creature like him, who had climbed up clinging to a woman's coattails, couldn't even hold eye contact with me for 3 seconds. "Justin, that $7. $5 million you're pocketing, hold on to it tight," I said. "Consider it an early severance package from Sarah, because sooner or later, Dominic is going to figure out what's really going on between you two. When that day comes, you'll be lucky to get 750 cents. The moment those words left my mouth, the ballroom erupted like a powder keg. In hushed murmurs, sharp intakes of breath, even the sound of someone accidentally knocking over a wine glass, all of it churned together in chaos. Sarah's face went from crimson to ashen white. Unconsciously, she cast a panicked glance toward the media section below the stage. Tonight's banquet had invited journalists. The group's PR department had always maintained well-oiled relations with the press, but if something like this got out, no amount of relationship management would be able to bury it. You're slandering me." Sarah's voice shook violently. Whether from rage or fear, it was impossible to tell. "Lucas, you just wait. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make sure you can never survive in this industry again. Feel free." I straightened the lapels of my suit jacket and turned to walk off the stage. "Bring out every bit of power you've got. I'll be waiting." I walked through the crowd. Everyone's eyes stuck to me like glue. Some whispered under their breath. Some were secretly snapping photos. Some shook their heads with heavy sighs. But not a single person stepped forward to stop me. When I reached the ballroom doors, I paused and glanced back at the stage. Sarah still stood there, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. Strands of her meticulously pinned hair had come loose and now hung limply down. The makeup on her face had been smeared by a cold sweat, blotching in patches. Justin was frantically trying to brush the paper shreds off her clothes, until Sarah shoved him away with such force he nearly lost his footing and toppled off the stage. In behind them, the giant LED screen continued scrolling the words, $100 billion deal signed successfully. The golden light of those words cast from behind, stretching their shadows across the floor, long and thin, like two twisting snakes. I turned my head back, pushed open the ballroom doors, and walked out without looking back. Behind me, the heavy carved doors slowly swung shut, sealing off that world of glittering gold and clinking champagne on the other side for good. The corridor was so quiet, the only sound was the echo of my leather soles striking the marble floor. I stepped into the elevator, pressed for the ground floor, and leaned back against the elevator wall, closing my eyes for a moment. 3 years, from the day Dominic personally came to recruit me, to tonight publicly humiliating his wife in front of the entire company. In between lay countless late nights of overtime and countless glasses of alcohol drunk, until I wanted to vomit. I had once imagined my departure would be dignified, a sunny afternoon, shaking hands with colleagues, peacefully walking out of this building. But Sarah refused to let me leave with dignity, so she could forget about having any herself. The elevator reached the ground floor. I walked across the empty lobby and pushed through the revolving door. The November night wind hit me full in the face, carrying a cold sharpness that filled my lungs. And strangely, it only made me feel more awake. The $800 in my pocket pressed against me, a hard and grating weight. I stood in the plaza at the base of Cross International Tower, looking up. The lights on the 26th floor were still on. Through the windows, I could faintly see shadows moving behind them. That absurd celebration was probably still going on. Only the main character was no longer me. My phone started buzzing. Every industry group chat was exploding. Someone had leaked the video of me tearing up my resignation letter and throwing it in the president's wife's face. My message list was flooded with condolences from peers and a flurry of job offers. I swiped past them without looking too closely and was about to head to the parking garage to get my car when the screen suddenly lit up with an incoming call. Sarah Whitmore. I stared at that name on the screen for a full 3 seconds. The corner of my mouth couldn't help but curl upward. She actually had the nerve to call. Hadn't she just been on stage calling security to throw me out? And barely a few minutes had passed, and she already couldn't help herself? I picked up the call before I could say a word. Sarah's voice came through first, but it was different from the shrillness on stage. This time, her tone carried a deliberate, unhurried smugness, as if she was still desperately trying to claw back the face she'd just lost. "Lucas, have you already left?" she asked. "Yeah, I've left." "Well, you certainly didn't waste any time." Sarah let out a laugh so fake I could tell even through the phone line. "But I just remembered something. The company's underground parking garage recently has an opening for a security guard. Monthly salary. $2,500 meals covered but not housing. Since you're out of a job anyway, how about you consider coming back for the position? That marketing director seat of yours, I could find 10 people more qualified to fill it with my eyes closed. But the security guard role? Somehow I feel like it suits your temperament." Stood in the center of the plaza, the wind whipping the hem of my suit jacket with a sharp, snapping sound. "Sarah," I said, "do you know who you're speaking to right now?" "Who?" "In a stray dog I just kicked out. I'm the single largest shareholder of Cross International Group." The voice on the other end of the line stopped abruptly. Not a pause, not a hesitation, but a complete, total dead silence, as though something had suddenly seized her by the throat and choked off all sound. I couldn't even hear her breathing. It was as if in that single instant her entire being had turned to stone. The wind in the plaza kept blowing, sending a few dead leaves skittering past my feet. I kept the phone pressed to my ear. I didn't hang up, and I didn't speak further. I just waited. After what felt like an eternity, probably only about a dozen seconds, Sarah's voice finally came through again. But that voice had completely changed. The smugness and arrogance from moments ago had been extinguished as if by a bucket of ice water. All that was left was a barely suppressed, throat-tightening panic, trembling so hard the syllables could barely string together into a sentence. You? What did you say? Sarah's voice was shaking over the line like a sifting screen. You? What did you say? Say it again. I didn't repeat myself. Some words only need to be said once. Smart people understand in a single second, and Sarah clearly understood immediately. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been gasping for breath so unevenly. I hung up the phone directly. Less than 3 seconds after the screen went dark, it lit up again. Sarah, I didn't answer. I let it vibrate in my palm. A third time, a fourth. In a fifth, she was calling back in a manic, relentless loop, the buzzing numbing my hand. In the span of 5 minutes, she called 17 times. The messages started with Lucas, clarify what you just said, and devolved into, where are you? Let's talk. And finally into, please pick up the phone. I switched my phone to silent mode and walked to the open-air parking lot on the east side of Cross International Tower. My car was a black Audi I'd been driving for 4 years, bought used, sitting among the surrounding Porsches and Maseratis. It was so shabby it was an eyesore. Among the group's senior executives, I was the only one still driving a car of this caliber. Once, Sarah had run into me in the elevator, and in front of 7 or 8 colleagues, she had remarked, "Mr. Adler's car sitting in our underground garage really drags down the entire company's image." I hadn't said a word at the time, not because I had no temper. It was because I knew that squabbling with someone like that was a waste of my own time. I got into the car, fired up the engine, and the dashboard's blue lights flickered to life. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the main road. In the rearview mirror, Cross International Tower grew smaller and smaller. The lights on the 26th floor were still on, and I could faintly see figures moving behind the ballroom's windows. The place I had poured 3 years of my life into, as of tonight, it had nothing to do with me anymore. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Sarah's relentless barrage of calls. It was an unfamiliar number. I pressed the car's Bluetooth. A hurried, middle-aged male voice came through, hoarse, laced with unmistakable tension. "Mr. Adler, this is Harold Walker, board secretary. Mrs. Whitmore has just instructed me to verify immediately what you said on the phone just now. Is it true?" Harold Walker, the group's board secretary, one of the few people in the company I still held a measure of respect for, an old hand in his 50s, a man who handled everything with impeccable precision. He had been with Cross International for 20 years, had watched Dominic rise through the ranks from the bottom up. "Harold," I said, steering with one hand, "tell Sarah to go check the shareholder registry herself. If she's illiterate, I can send her the scanned copies of my shareholding certificates." There was silence on the other end for a moment. When Harold spoke again, his voice was even lower. "Mr. Adler, this is an enormously serious matter. Please don't joke with me. The group's largest shareholder has always been Mr. Dominic Cross, with a 26% stake. That's what's on the books. What you said about your shareholding percentage, 17.3% direct holding," I cut him off. My tone was flat, like I was reading a weather forecast. Plus 3 proxy agreements. The total controlled interest exceeds 30%. Dominic's 26% is his alone. The 8% under Sarah's name is marital property. Strictly speaking, half of it belongs to Dominic. Do the math. Who's the largest shareholder? Harold sucked in a sharp breath. I heard the rustling sound of paper being flipped over on his end, probably looking something up. After a long beat, he spoke again, his voice audibly altered. "Mr. Adler, when did you... all these shares?" "Over a year and a half now," I said. "Acquired in batches. Every transaction was legal and compliant. Every transaction was filed with the SEC. Harold, you're the board secretary. You of all people should know this information is all publicly available. The reason Sarah couldn't find it is that she's never once cared to look at the company's shareholder structure. The only thing she cares about is figuring out how to issue bonuses to Justin Caldwell." With that, I hung up and merged onto the airport expressway. The speedometer hit 120 kph. Outside the window, streetlights fell back one after another. A scene suddenly flashed through my mind 3 years ago, Dominic sitting on the sofa across from me, pouring me a cup of tea with his own hands, smiling. "Lucas, come to Cross International, I'll give you the best platform and the greatest trust." The platform he had given. But the trust, when he was vacationing in the Maldives with Sarah, I was pulling all-nighters at the office reworking proposals. When he was overseas pursuing new projects, Sarah was throwing her weight around the company, reducing the marketing department to a chaotic mess. Every time he came back, Sarah would have a flawless narrative ready, packaging my achievements as Justin's accomplishments. Dominic wasn't unaware. He simply couldn't be bothered to intervene. His indulgence of this woman had crossed the line into a complete disregard for right and wrong. Forget it. I wasn't going to dwell on it. I pressed deeper on the accelerator, the engine's roar filling the cabin. As of tonight, none of these rotten affairs had anything to do with me anymore. No, scratch that. As of tonight, looking at these rotten affairs from a different angle, I wasn't the one who needed to panic. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call or a text, but an email notification. I glanced at the sender and nearly laughed out loud. Cross International Group Legal Department. The subject line read, "Legal inquiry letter regarding your claim of holding group equity." The language was meticulously formal, stamped with the legal department seal at the bottom. Sarah had mobilized the legal department to probe me, and I didn't reply to the email. Instead, I sent Harold a message directly. "Please convey to Mrs. Whitmore that a legal inquiry letter is useless. Tell her to go check the official business registration public information system herself. Also, tell her this: if she harasses me one more time, tomorrow I will convene an emergency board meeting in my capacity as the largest shareholder. The first item on the agenda will be a motion to remove her from her position as executive director." After sending it, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on driving. After that message went out, my phone finally fell silent. The silence was so absolute, it was almost unlike Sarah's style. I guessed she was, at this very moment in the VIP lounge on the 26th floor of Cross International Tower, raging hysterically at Harold and the head of legal. Her meticulously applied makeup was probably already streaked and ruined by cold sweat, and those diamond earrings on her ears had probably been ripped off and hurled onto the table. As my car passed a gas station, Tony Fisher's call came in. Old brother from marketing. Had been with me for 2 years. The number 2 contributor to this $100 billion deal. His voice over the phone was even more worked up than Harold's. His volume so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Lucas. Holy shit, the group chats are blowing up. Sarah just smashed 3 glasses in the VIP lounge. Harold personally checked the shareholder registry. After he checked, his face went completely white. That bastard Justin tried to comfort her, and Sarah shoved him straight to the floor. The whole company is saying you're the real hidden boss behind Cross International." "What hidden boss? I hold 30% of the shares, that's all. I'm not the chairman." "Fuck, 30% isn't enough. Dominic only has 26. You've got 4 points on him." Tony was so worked up, his voice was cracking. "Lucas, you hid this way too deep. Give your brother some real talk. What exactly is your background?" "No special background," I said. "Just that when I signed the contract 3 years ago, I kept an extra eye open." Dominic's compensation package included an equity incentive, vesting a portion each year. I felt that wasn't enough, so I bought some more on the secondary market myself. "You bought some on the secondary market?" Tony repeated my words, his tone dripping with disbelief. "You bought all the way up to 17.3%, and you call that buying some? In any case, just do your job well. Don't worry about anything else. And if Sarah tries to make trouble for the marketing department, just pin it all on me." Tony burst out laughing on the other end. "Right now, she doesn't have the headspace to make trouble for us. She can barely save herself." By the way, Lucas, I just heard from Harold that Sarah already made an overseas call to Dominic. It was 5 a.m. local time over there, and the phone rang a dozen times before he picked up. Sarah was crying her eyes out on the call. Dominic only said one thing: "I'm booking the next flight." Dominic was coming back. That was within my expectations. The $100 billion deal had just been signed as chairman. He was supposed to come back to steer the ship anyway. It was just that now. With what had happened, he had one more reason to return. His wife had publicly humiliated the company's largest shareholder, and that largest shareholder now held enough equity to make his position as chairman very, very uncomfortable. "Got it," I said. I'm hanging up now, I'm driving. Inai ended Tony's call and steered my car into the underground garage of my residential complex. I parked, killed the engine, and leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. The fluorescent tubes in the garage hummed faintly. The silence all around was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. 3 years, I, Lucas Adler, had worked in this building from the director's office all the way to the top-floor ballroom, from utter obscurity to landing a $100 billion deal. What I relied on was performance earned deal by deal, all-nighters conquered one by one. Sarah thought I was an employee she could crush at will. Justin thought I was a pushover who would never fight back. It never once crossed their minds that the man sitting across from them in that conference room was holding a bigger hand than theirs. My phone lit up again. Still Sarah. This time I didn't hesitate. I picked up. Her voice now was utterly different from before. No shrillness, no arrogance, none of that smug, condescending superiority. All that remained was an irrepressible raw panic and a sliver of stubborn, lingering defiance. Lucas, her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying or screaming earlier. What exactly are you? What am I? Inai leaned back in my seat, looking out the sunroof at the garage ceiling, and let out a short laugh. Sarah, 3 years ago when Dominic poached me to come to Cross International, you probably never even glanced at my resume. You assumed I was just like all those nepotism hires you brought in, people who climbed the ladder by kissing their superiors' boots. On the other end, Sarah fell silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "Those shares you hold, what exactly are you trying to do?" Originally, nothing at all, I said. Originally, I planned to wait until the banquet was over, then respectfully submit my resignation letter, neatly hand over my remaining work, and quietly leave. I already had my next destination lined up. I had zero intention of using this 30% stake to make any kind of move. It was you, Sarah. You just had to publicly humiliate me. You just had to, after I'd already walked out of the company, call me up and tell me to come back and be a security guard in your parking garage. I paused. My voice was as calm and still as a pool of stagnant water. Do you realize, when you called me up to offer me a security guard position, I was in the middle of reviewing the updated shareholder registry data? You almost succeeded. You almost convinced me that fighting people like you was utterly pointless. But no. You had to throw that $800 in my face. You had to chase me down after I'd already left and land one more kick. Sarah's end went utterly silent. So you asked what I'm trying to do? I said. Simple. I'm going to make you understand that your title of CEO's wife, when faced with absolute controlling equity, is worth absolutely nothing. Sarah smashed the fourth glass in the VIP lounge. Crystal shards sprayed across the floor, skidding all the way to the edge of Harold Walker's leather shoes. Unobtrusively, Harold stepped back half a pace. In the 20 years he'd served the Cross family, he had never seen Sarah lose control like this. Half her pinned-up hair had collapsed. The sleeve of her champagne-colored couture gown was stained with red wine. Barefoot on the carpet, she had long since kicked her 12-centimeter stilettos somewhere under the coffee table. Impossible! Sarah's voice was sharp and distorted. 17%! Where could he possibly have gotten that many shares? Did you verify this thoroughly? Harold handed her the shareholder registry, open to the page where a line had been highlighted with a fluorescent marker. Lucas Adler, natural person shareholding ratio 17.3%. Registration dates spread across 3 batches. The earliest transaction dated back a year and a half. Mrs. Whitmore, we've verified it 3 times over. Harold's tone was as measured as he could make it. Every transaction has a record on file with the SEC. The source of funds is clear. The transaction timeline is complete. Mr. Adler holds a 17.3% direct stake in the group. Additionally, there are 3 proxy agreements on file with the relevant government authorities. When combined, his actual controlled equity exceeds 30%. In a strictly legal sense, he is indeed currently the single largest shareholder of Cross International. Sarah took the registry. Her hands were trembling so violently she flipped 2 pages and then tossed it onto the sofa as if the paper itself had burned her. Where did he get the money? She spun around, eyes boring into Harold. Cross International's market cap is over $200 billion. What does 17% of that cost? Over 30 billion. He was a marketing director, annual salary plus bonus maxed out at 5 million. Where would he get over $30 billion? That's a question I also asked myself just now. Harold pushed his glasses up, his voice sinking lower, so I took the liberty of looking into Mr. Adler's background from before he joined the company. He produced another document, thinner than the shareholder registry, only a few sparse pages. But when Sarah took that document and began to read, her face shifted through several shades within the span of a minute. Lucas Adler, 32 years old, Harold read out the key details. Before joining Cross International, he worked on Wall Street for 7 years in cross-border M&A. He handled 11 major M&A cases. Insiders in the industry called him the scalpel of M&A. At age 26, he personally led a leveraged buyout of a North American energy company, his personal cut from that deal. Harold paused. How much? Sarah's voice had completely changed. $270 million US, Harold said. Pre-tax. Silence descended on the lounge for a full 5 seconds. Only the floor clock in the corner continued its monotonous ticking. He's that Adler? Sarah's voice dropped abruptly, as if she were talking to herself. When Dominic recruited him, he told me he was some expert in M&A from Wall Street. I didn't pay attention. I thought he was just some high-level corporate drone. Mrs. Whitmore, he is no high-level corporate drone. Harold let out a bitter smile. His personal assets overseas, by conservative estimate, are no less than $500 million US. Before he came to Cross International, he had already registered his own family office in Hong Kong. Why he was willing to come work as a marketing director at Cross International, to be honest, even now, I still can't fully figure it out. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa. The hem of her couture gown dragged across the carpet, catching shards of broken glass she didn't even notice. She pressed her fingers to her temples, her lips tightly pressed into a thin line. Why didn't he say anything earlier? She suddenly looked up, eyes red-rimmed. He's been at the company for 3 years. Why has no one ever told me any of this? Because you never asked, Harold said calmly. And because you have never once attended any of his quarterly performance reviews. Those words weren't heavy, but they hit like a bucket of ice water poured over her head. Sarah opened her mouth and found she had no rebuttal. 3 years, the monthly reports Lucas submitted, she hadn't read a single one. Every time Dominic asked her to attend the marketing department's quarterly meetings, she had demurred, pleading a headache, or she had simply been in the Maldives, in Hokkaido, in Paris, anywhere but the company. The only time she had ever set foot in the marketing department's workspace was the day she brought Justin in to pick out his office. At that time, Lucas had been in the conference room with his team, in the middle of a crucial project strategy session. She had passed right by without even knocking. What do we do now? Sarah's voice finally took on a note of real, genuine panic. He has 30% of the equity in his hands. He can call a board meeting at any time. If, at the board meeting, he can ally with other shareholders to remove you from your executive director position. Harold finished her sentence for her, his tone still flat, as if delivering a weather report. According to the company's articles of association, any shareholder holding more than 30% has the right to petition for an emergency board meeting. A simple majority vote is all it takes to remove an executive director. Mr. Dominic Cross holds 26%. You hold 8% together, that's 34%. But the 30% he holds if he can pull in just 1 or 2 institutional shareholders. And institutional shareholders, as a rule, only look at interests, not personal relationships. Harold didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood the implication perfectly. Call Dominic. Sarah stood up, pacing the room. Tell him to come back immediately. No, wait and call yet first. I have already spoken with Mr. Dominic Cross, Harold said. He is in Switzerland. It was 5 in the morning local time when I reached him. After hearing the full account, Mr. Cross was silent for a very long time. Then he instructed me to relay one message to you. What message? Mr. Cross said. Until I return, do nothing. Sarah's face lost another layer of color. She had been Dominic's wife for 8 years. She understood her husband far too well. Dominic was an intensely rational man, rational to the point of near coldness. When he married her, everyone in their circle knew the truth. It was less about love and more about the strategic value of the Whitmore family's channel resources to Cross International's business expansion. The 8 years of indulgence he had shown her was at its core a cost-benefit calculation, not some deep, undying affection. The moment Sarah's presence threatened his control of the group, Dominic would make his choice without hesitation. Fine, I'll do nothing. I'll wait for Dominic to come back. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain a sliver of composure. But we can't leave Lucas idle on his end. What if tomorrow he... Before she could finish, the door to the VIP lounge swung open. Justin Caldwell sauntered in, carrying a hot cup of coffee, his face still plastered with that ever-present ingratiating smile, as if nothing whatsoever had happened. He had changed his clothes. The Armani suit he'd worn on stage had gotten stained when Sarah shoved him. Now he wore a cream-colored cashmere cardigan. His hair had been restyled. He looked, if anything, even more self-satisfied than before. Sarah, don't stress so much. Justin handed the coffee to Sarah, his tone as breezy as if he were discussing today's lovely weather. I was outside listening to them gossiping for ages, something about 17% shares, largest shareholder. Sounds scary, I know, but think about it. The guy was a marketing director. At best, he's got the fate of a corporate drone. Where would a corporate drone get the chops to amass that many shares? There's got to be something fishy going on. Insura took the coffee, frowning at him. Harold already checked. Every transaction has a paper trail. Everything is legal and compliant, Sarah said. This isn't as simple as you think. Justin waved a hand dismissively and sat down beside Sarah, crossing one leg over the other, his smile brimming with unconcern. Paper trails can be faked. Data can be altered. Sarah, you're too innocent. You don't understand the methods of people like him. Trust me, I've worked in the same department as him for 3 years. I know his playbook inside and out. This guy is all smoke and mirrors. He puts on a hell of a show, but he's a paper tiger underneath. Harold stood to the side, watching Justin in utter silence. The look in his eyes was the look of someone watching a man sprinting full speed toward the edge of a cliff. Are you certain? Sarah's voice wavered slightly. 100% certain. Justin pounded his chest, then leaned in closer and lowered his voice. Sarah, think, if he was really that wealthy, would he be driving that beat-up old Audi? Would he be living in some ordinary residential complex? Would he have gone 3 whole years without adding a single decent piece to his wardrobe? If he actually held 17% of the shares, a tiny collateralization would let him liquidate hundreds of millions in cash. How could he possibly maintain that shabby front? I suspect this whole shareholder identity of his is a complete fabrication. He had someone mock up a fake document to scare you. The panic in Sarah's eyes receded a fraction, replaced by a flicker of hesitation. Seeing Sarah's expression loosen, Justin pressed harder. Tell you what, I know a few guys who do private investigation work, professional technique, tight-lipped. Let me have them dig into Lucas's background. Within 3 days, guaranteed they'll strip him bare. By then, whether it's forging shareholder documents or financial fraud, we'll just pick a charge and make sure he never recovers. Dominic said to do nothing. Sarah started, but Justin cut her off. Mr. Cross said you should do nothing. He didn't say I couldn't. Justin smoothly reframed it, his tone dripping with eager flattery. Sarah, relax. Leave this to me. In a pauper like Lucas, he can't kick up a fuss for much longer. At this, Harold finally couldn't stay silent any longer. Mr. Caldwell, I would personally advise you to tread with extreme caution. Adler spent 7 years on Wall Street doing M&A. He's handled deals in the tens of billions. This kind of person is not a paper tiger. He's a real one. Justin turned his head, looking Harold up and down, a contemptuous smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mr. Walker, you've spent most of your career as a board secretary in this building. The world you've seen is limited to the administrative affairs of this one tower. Real bare-knuckle business combat, you might not quite understand it. If Adler really had that level of ability, would he have been content to be a marketing director at Cross International for all this time? Doesn't that strike you as a contradiction? Harold didn't argue. He simply shook his head, retreated to the window, and looked down at his phone, saying nothing more. Justin assumed his logic was unassailable. He took a sip of coffee, his face full of disdain. How could he possibly understand why a man who had already made his fortune on Wall Street would willingly return home and start over from scratch? He couldn't comprehend a concept called ambition. In Justin's world, the sole purpose of work was to extract money. Extracting money equaled success. He simply couldn't fathom someone staking their entire personal fortune on a platform's potential on the promise of a partnership. It was the same way a frog at the bottom of a well cannot comprehend the vastness of the sky. Fine, go ahead and investigate. Sarah ultimately nodded. There was a trace of reluctance and a sliver of desperate hope in her voice. But mark my words, keep it clean. Don't let Dominic find out. Relax. Justin stood up, patting his chest. Within 3 days, I'll have Lucas crawling back, begging us for mercy. With that, he turned and strode out of the lounge, his steps light, humming a tune. The corridor lights cast a soft glow on the back of his cream-colored cashmere sweater, making it look at once plush and deeply grating. Harold watched that silhouette disappear down the corridor, then looked down at his phone screen. On it was the LinkedIn profile he had pulled up. Lucas Adler, former senior vice president, cross-border MAA, Goldman Sachs, handled 11 major M&A cases without a single failure. Selected for Forbes 30 under 30 at age 30. Harold quietly locked his phone. He raised his head to look at Sarah. He hesitated for a moment. In the end, he said nothing at all. And at that very moment, Justin was walking out of the main entrance of Cross International Tower. Standing in the freezing wind, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact saved as Vic. He dialed. The call connected, and an oily, fawning voice came through the other end. Well, Mr. Caldwell, what can I do for you? Check someone out for me. Justin lit a cigarette, exhaling a plume of white smoke into the cold air, his smile brimming with overconfidence. Former marketing director of Cross International Group, Lucas Adler. I want every scrap of dirt on him. Financial, personal life, anything. Price is not an issue. After hanging up, Justin looked up at the still-lit windows on the 26th floor of Cross International Tower. He dropped his cigarette butt on the ground and crushed it under his heel. Adler, he muttered to himself, that same nauseating smirk he'd worn for 3 years plastered across his face. 3 days from now, I'll show you what it means to be utterly ruined. The man Justin hired was named Vic Zamora. In certain circles, he went by the nickname Lamprey Guy, who did grey market private investigation work, charging on a sliding scale depending on the client. His reputation was utterly rotten, but his one selling point was audacity. He'd take any dirty job, no questions asked. Justin had met him the year before when a project manager in the marketing department fought with him over a parking space. Justin had sixed Vic on the guy, dug up enough dirt to force him to quit. Now, he was deploying the same playbook against me. After taking the job, Vic brought 2 of his men and spent 2 days turning my entire life, from university to the present, upside down. They checked my bank transaction records, at least the ones they could access. They checked my property records, 3 properties, all in ordinary residential complexes, combined worth less than a single one of Sarah's villas. They checked my social connections, aside from a few old classmates and industry partners. There was almost nothing complex about my personal life. There was only one thing they failed to uncover. The 17.3% equity I held in Cross International Avery's single transaction record was buried within an offshore structure that a private investigator of Vic's caliber couldn't even get close to brushing against. The only thing he could find was my salary record from 3 years at Cross International and that 4-year-old second-hand Audi. So on the afternoon of the 3rd day, Vic delivered a thin investigative report to Justin. After flipping through it, Justin nearly laughed out loud. This is it. He tossed the report onto his desk, legs crossed, his face overflowing with gleeful smugness. I told you Adler's just a broke-ass employee. That so-called shareholding is 100% fake. Look at this. 3 properties combined aren't worth as much as one of my Porsches. His bank balance can't even crack 7 figures. In a guy with this net worth pretending to be a major shareholder? Beside him, Vic bobbed his head, fawning in agreement. Mr. Caldwell is absolutely right. There really isn't much to this guy, although, Although what? Well, when we were going through his personal computer, we found an encrypted folder. Vic pulled up a photo on his phone and handed it over. We couldn't crack it, but we got a screenshot of the file name, Mr. Caldwell. See if you recognize it. Maybe it's some kind of internal company document. Justin took the phone and glanced at it. The expression on his face froze for maybe a second. The folder name was a string of English letters and numbers, a project code from Cross International Group's internal financial management system. Justin recognized it immediately. Because that project code corresponded exactly to the batch of so-called marketing and promotion expenses he had personally handled over the past 2 years, he flipped the phone face down. The smile on his face retracted, but his mouth remained stubborn. It's nothing, just a file. He handed the phone back to Vic. Even if he's got something real, he would have used it by now if it mattered. Vic said nothing further. He collected his final payment and left. Sitting in his office, after finishing his cup of pour-over coffee, Justin pulled out his phone and texted Sarah, "Investigation's done. His background is totally clean. Adler's just an empty shell trying to bluff. You can rest easy." After sending it, he stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the traffic flowing along the street below. The final trace of unease in his heart was firmly suppressed. He didn't believe Lucas Adler had any real power, because Justin himself was a man with no real power. In his understanding of the world, everyone who appeared impressive was just faking it, exactly like himself. The screen on the left displayed a log of Vic's team's movements, in from the surveillance cameras at my residential complex entrance, to the cafe where they had set up their stakeout, into every single attempt they had made to hack into my personal cloud storage. He wore the title of Deputy Director of Marketing, yet couldn't even write a complete market analysis report. And at that exact moment I was sitting in the study of my home, 3 laptops open in front of me. The entire process had been tracked and documented from start to finish. I had spent 7 years doing M&A on Wall Street. I had made more enemies than Justin had ever met. And if I couldn't even defend against a third-rate private investigator, I would have been dead and buried 100 times over already. The screen in the middle displayed an encrypted backup of Cross International's internal financial system data I had retrieved in my capacity as a shareholder, following the company's articles of association before my departure. Within that data was a precise second-by-second record of every single payment Justin Caldwell had personally handled over the past 2 years, amounts, timestamps, recipient accounts, and the full approval workflow. The screen on the right displayed an email that was already drafted. The recipient, Dominic Cross's private overseas email address. The total attachment size, 2 gigabytes. It contained a complete chain of evidence proving Justin Caldwell's embezzlement of company funds under the guise of fake marketing expenses. 8 transactions in total, the combined sum exceeded $84 million. The earliest transaction dated back 2 years. Justin hadn't even been at the company for a full year yet. I had spent 3 days organizing this evidence. It wasn't meant for now. It was meant to wait for the most opportune moment. But Vic's appearance today changed my plan. Justin had chosen to go scorched earth first, so he had no one to blame but himself for me showing my hand early. I clicked send. The 2 gigabyte attachment crawled across the progress bar for roughly 40 seconds. Then the screen displayed a line of text. Email sent. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and took a sip of the coffee on the desk. To be honest, Justin's embezzlement was something I had already discovered while I was still at the company. The marketing department's quarterly budget approvals all went through my signature. I could distinguish real expenditures from fake reimbursements with my eyes closed. Those 8 marketing expenses of Justin's, each one's reimbursement documentation was riddled with gaping holes. Some recipient companies were empty shells. Some contracts didn't even have the correct company seal. One invoice was outright fake, but I hadn't exposed it at the time. Not because I was afraid of him. It was because I knew that exposing an issue of this magnitude wouldn't just take down Justin alone. Sarah, as executive director, was required to sign off on any expenditure exceeding $5 million. The fact that those 8 sums had been smoothly approved meant that every single one bore Sarah's personal signature. She was either fully aware or she had signed with her eyes closed. Either way, once it was exposed, she couldn't escape. Originally, I had planned to leave this piece of evidence for Dominic to digest on his own time. Family shame shouldn't be aired in public. I had no interest in cleaning up his household for him. But Justin had just had to come at me proactively, even hiring a private investigator to dig into me. That was the equivalent of advancing his own execution date. I set down my coffee cup and picked up my phone to scroll through messages. Tony had just texted, "Lucas, Justin was humming a tune when he came back to the office today. He seemed to be in a fantastic mood. Does he still not know that you're holding his leash?" I replied. "He will soon enough." Roughly 6 hours after the email was sent, my phone rang with a call from Dominic, an international call. The signal wasn't perfectly stable, but Dominic's voice came through the line as cool and restrained as ever. He used no emotionally charged opening. He simply said, "Adler, I read the email. Yeah, the evidence is real. Every transaction has the original documentation. It can be submitted for forensic authentication at any time." In there was a very long silence on the other end of the line. I heard Dominic inhale deeply, then exhale slowly. It was the breathing pattern of someone forcibly suppressing a massive wave of emotion. And he knew it well. I had seen it too many times at the negotiating table, the way the opposing party breathes when they're on the verge of collapse but forcing themselves to stay calm. This was exactly that rhythm. "Justin," Dominic's voice was low and tightly reined, "started making moves 2 years ago?" "Correct. The first transaction was less than 10 months after he joined the company." "Sarah." Dominic paused. "Did she know?" It was an exquisitely precise question. Dominic hadn't asked, "Was she involved?" or "Did she sign off?" He had asked, "Did she know?" That meant he already knew the answer before he even opened his mouth. He just needed someone external to confirm it. "Every transaction has your wife's handwritten signature," I said. "Mr. Cross, I'm a shareholder, not a judge. That's a question you'll have to ask her yourself." Dominic fell silent again for a while, and then said something I found slightly unexpected. "Adler, I'll arrive in San Francisco the day after tomorrow. After I land, I want to meet with you." "That can be arranged," I said, "but on the condition that Justin's matter is dealt with first. I don't sit down with a company that tolerates an $84 million embezzlement." "Don't worry." Dominic's voice suddenly became very cold, so cold that I could feel the chill radiating through half the planet. "Justin's situation, I will absolutely deal with it. Deal with it cleanly." After hanging up, I tossed my phone onto the sofa and walked to the window, watching the sky gradually lighten outside. This night had passed quickly. Dominic said he would deal with it cleanly. I believed him, because that man's one and only virtue was that he always did exactly what he said. 8 years ago, he married Sarah and gained access to the Whitmore family's network of resources, transforming Cross International from a second-tier enterprise into an industry leader. 8 years later, to protect Cross International, he would make another transaction without hesitation, even if it meant sacrificing his own marriage. And as for Justin, he still had no idea that his bold declaration, "Within 3 days I'll make sure Adler is utterly ruined," had already been shoved into a grave by his own 2 hands. I opened my phone and saw another text from Tony. "Lucas, explosive news. Mr. Dominic Cross has advanced his return. He was originally set for 3 days from now, but he rescheduled to the earliest possible flight. He's landing tomorrow afternoon. The whole company is saying he's not coming back for the big deal. He's coming back to deal with Sarah," I replied with one word. "Yeah." Then I flipped my phone over on the coffee table and continued drinking my coffee. Outside the window, the sky had fully brightened. Sunlight spilled in, falling upon the photocopy of my resignation letter that I hadn't yet had the chance to mail out. I looked at it for a second, let out a short laugh, reached out, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into the trash can. Dominic's private jet touched down at 4:30 p.m. the following day. He had originally gone abroad for the follow-up negotiations on the $100 billion deal. The itinerary was supposed to be 7 days. He had returned on day 4. No one greeted him at the airport. In there was only a black Maybach idling at the VIP exit. Thomas, the driver who had served him for 15 years, asked not a single question. He opened the door, waited for Dominic to get in, and silently drove onto the highway. Dominic sat in the back seat. He had removed his suit jacket and draped it beside him. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearms, his tie was loosened a notch. His face betrayed very little emotion, but one glance in the rearview mirror was all Thomas needed to know his boss was hovering at the edge of a towering rage. Dominic was a man who spoke less the angrier he became. Since getting in the car, he hadn't uttered a single word. This was, under normal circumstances, impossible. "Back to the office," Dominic finally spoke. His voice was low, but every word carried a suppressed, icy edge. "Have Harold bring Sarah to my office. Tell her I want to see her within 1 minute of my arrival." Thomas acknowledged the order. Keeping one hand on the wheel, he used the other to send Harold a voice message. The Maybach cut through the city and pulled into Cross International Tower's underground garage smoothly. Harold was already waiting at the elevator bank. The old board secretary, who had served the Cross family for 2 decades, looked like the wrinkles on his face had doubled overnight. His under-eye bags were so heavy it seemed he hadn't slept in 3 days. He took Dominic's suit jacket and fell into step behind him, voice lowered, starting his report. "Mr. Cross, I've verified the matters you asked me to look into overnight. The 8 marketing expenses handled by Justin Caldwell total exactly $2 million. Every single one carries Mrs. Whitmore's signature. The approval workflow is fully documented and time-stamped in the system. The largest single transaction was from Q3 of last year, an overseas channel development fee of $32 million. The contract listed an overseas recipient company, but that company has no operational records whatsoever in the local business registry. Additionally, I had finance pull Justin Caldwell's personal account records." Dominic stopped walking. He turned his head and looked at Harold. "Continue." "Over the course of 2 years, Justin Caldwell's personal accounts received a cumulative total of $46 million. The sources are spread across 7 different shell company accounts. The timing closely aligns with several of the company disbursements he personally handled. I suspect he didn't pocket all of the remaining dollars. 30-some million a portion may have flowed to other channels. But that will require a more in-depth audit to trace precisely." Dominic listened in silence. He stood still for 3 full seconds, then resumed walking. His stride was faster than before, his leather soles hitting the marble floor with a sharp, urgent rhythm. Several employees in the corridor saw him from a distance and, before they could even manage a greeting, automatically pressed themselves against the wall to clear the path. "Is Sarah in the office?" Dominic asked. "Yes." Harold had to half-jog to keep pace. "Justin Caldwell is also there. I advised him to leave beforehand. He refused, said he must see you to explain himself in person." Dominic didn't respond. He pushed open the door to the CEO's office directly. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, dressed in a black cashmere coat. Her makeup was heavier than usual, likely an attempt to mask the exhaustion of the past few days. But the burst blood vessels in her eyes and her faintly trembling fingers betrayed her utterly. Her whole face was pulled taut, like porcelain on the verge of shattering. Justin stood beside her. In the moment he saw Dominic enter, he instinctively shuffled half a step backward, his face arranging itself into that ingratiating smile. "Dominic, listen to me." Sarah stood up, took a single step forward, and was pinned in place by a single look from Dominic. "Sit down." 2 words, not loud, but Sarah's legs seemed to lose all their bones at once. She collapsed directly back onto the sofa. She had been married to Dominic for 8 years. She knew all too well when her husband was reasoning and when he was issuing a command. This tone was a command. Dominic didn't sit. He swiveled the laptop on his desk around so the screen faced Sarah and opened a folder. 8 disbursements in the financial system. Total sum, $84. $2 million. Dominic's voice was as calm as if he were reading a quarterly earnings report. "Every single one has your electronic signature on it. Sarah, tell me, where is that money right now?" Sarah stared at the rows of data laid out on the screen. Her fingers clenched the armrest of the sofa, knuckles turning white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice trembled, but she held on stubbornly. "These were all marketing expenses approved through normal procedures. The contracts and invoices are all there. The compliance process was followed. How am I supposed to know where the money went?" I didn't spend it. You didn't spend it. Dominic clicked open a scanned copy of one of the receipts. Then kindly explain why every single recipient company of these funds, 7 in total, can trace their actual controllers back to one single overseas account. And that account's ultimate beneficiary is the personal financial advisor you've had since your university days. Sarah's face instantly drained of color. That's not how it is. This is all Lucas. She suddenly looked up, her eyes already red-rimmed, her voice abruptly pitching several octaves higher. This is all Lucas framing me, Dominic, don't you see? He's been at the company for 3 years and never once mentioned being a shareholder. Then on the exact day I give him his bonus, he reveals his equity stake and dumps Justin's matter in your lap. This is clearly a setup. He did this on purpose. You say he's framing you. Dominic's tone remained utterly even. Then tell me, the signatures in the system, did you sign them or not? Sarah's mouth opened. No words came out. Did you, or did you not, personally approve the workflow for those 8 transactions? Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, her lips quivered violently, the voice squeezing out of her throat as if through clenched teeth. I signed them! But I didn't look closely at the time. Justin handed me the documents and I just signed. I thought they were all normal business expenses. Beside her, Justin's face had also changed. He hurriedly jumped in. Mr. Cross, it's truly not what it looks like. Those funds were genuinely spent on marketing efforts. It's just that some of the channels may not have been strictly conventional, but the money was genuinely dispersed. Be quiet. Dominic's voice wasn't raised, but Justin reacted as if he'd been seized by the throat. The second half of his sentence choked and died. He had known Dominic for 3 years. This was the first time he had ever seen this expression on the man's face, not anger, not disappointment, but a kind of cold, utterly emotionless scrutiny. The look one gives a piece of depreciated, useless asset that no longer holds any operational value whatsoever. Justin. Dominic walked over until he stood directly in front of him, a full head taller, and looked down at him. I'm going to give you one chance. Within 3 days, return the dollars, 84. 2 million every cent back to the company account. If it's a single dollar short, I will have the legal department initiate a criminal complaint. You should know what the sentencing range is for embezzling over $80 million. Justin's face had gone utterly white to the point that even his lips had lost all color. Mr. Cross, I genuinely didn't take that much. In a portion really was spent on 3 days. Dominic enunciated those 2 words, then ceased to look at him. He turned and walked around to sit behind his desk. Harold stood at the doorway, silent throughout, but the phone in his hand had its screen lit up. It displayed unmistakably an active recording interface. From the moment Dominic had entered the office, every single word spoken had been captured in its entirety. Sarah rose from the sofa and walked to the desk. The tears finally broke free, streaming down and carving 2 black streaks through her meticulously applied eye makeup. Dominic, you can't do this to me. Her voice was raw, thick with tears. I am your wife. I've spent 8 years with you. You'd rather believe an outsider like Lucas than me. He's trying to destroy our family. He wants to seize control of Cross International. Every single word out of his mouth is poison meant to sow discord. Dominic leaned back in his chair and looked at his wife. He was silent for a very long time, so long that Sarah's sobs gradually died down, so long that Justin, standing in the corner, didn't dare breathe too loudly, so long that Harold, standing silently at the door, quietly pulled it shut from the outside. Sarah, Dominic finally spoke. His voice was soft, but each word landed with the weight of a nail being driven into Sarah's ears. When I married you, your father said something to me. He said, my daughter has been spoiled rotten since childhood. Please be patient with her. At the time, I thought it was no big deal, in a bit pampered at worst. She'd spend money extravagantly, maybe have a bit of a temper. I was indeed patient. For 8 years, he paused. His fingers tapped the desk lightly, twice. But in these 8 years, how many people have you shoehorned into this company? How much money have you approved that never should have been approved because you were my wife? I never pursued any of it. But do you understand what Justin has done this time? He touched the money of the shareholders of a publicly listed company. That is criminal liability, and you signed off for him. That makes you an accomplice. In the world of business, no one cares that you're the CEO's wife. Sarah stood there, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face without pause. The expression on her face transformed from indignation into raw fear. "You have exactly one path forward now," Dominic said. "Tell me everything you know about that $84.2 million. Every trail of the funds, every account, every person involved. After you've spoken clearly, I'll clean up whatever mess is left. But if you continue to insist that Lucas is framing you," he stood up and picked up his suit jacket from the back of the chair, "then you can go explain it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation yourself." The emergency board meeting was set for Thursday morning at 10 a.m. in the boardroom on the 48th floor of Cross International Tower. I arrived 15 minutes early. Harold stood at the entrance to the boardroom. When he saw me step out of the elevator, he visibly startled. He probably hadn't expected me to show up. After all, the purpose of this board meeting, which Sarah had convened, was something every person in that room understood clearly: to rally the other shareholders and strip me of my board seat. "Mr. Adler," Harold hurried over, lowering his voice. "There are 11 directors present today. Apart from you and Mr. Dominic Cross, there are also representatives from 3 institutional shareholders. Mrs. Whitmore's side has already communicated with 2 of the institutions in advance. I can't judge the specifics of the situation, but you should be mentally prepared." "Thank you, Harold," I patted him on the shoulder. "I am." Pushing open the boardroom door, I found both sides of the long mahogany conference table already filled. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his suit immaculate. His face revealed no discernible emotion. He merely gave a slight nod as I walked in. Sarah was seated to his left, dressed in a black business suit, her hair once again pinned up impeccably. She had applied heavy makeup which carefully concealed the exhaustion on her face, but the burst blood vessels in her eyes were impossible to hide. I swept my gaze across the directors present. Of the 3 institutional shareholder representatives, 2 had brought their legal counsel along. That meant they weren't here just to attend a meeting. They were here to make a decision. When Sarah saw me take my seat, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Ini knew that smile all too well 3 days ago, on the stage at the celebration banquet, when she'd thrown that $800 at me. Her face had worn that exact same expression. She believed she held the winning hand. Fellow directors. Sarah rose to her feet, a bound document in hand. "The purpose of convening this emergency board meeting today is a single agenda item: to review the matter of Mr. Lucas Adler's shareholder standing and his board seat." She flipped open the document and swept her gaze across the room, letting it finally rest on me. "Following verification by the legal department, Mr. Adler does indeed hold a 17.3% equity stake in Cross International. This point is not in dispute." Sarah's tone was all business, yet every word was laced with an undertone of barely restrained glee. "However, we have simultaneously uncovered a serious issue during the period in which Mr. Adler held a significant equity stake in the company. He concurrently served as the company's marketing director. In that capacity, he had access to internal information that he leveraged for his personal investment decisions. This conduct is in potential violation of SEC disclosure regulations and the company's internal governance policies." She pushed a document into the center of the conference table. "This is a legal opinion issued by the legal department. Its conclusion is unequivocal. Mr. Adler's actions constitute a severe conflict of interest. Under Article 19 of the company's Articles of Association, the board is empowered to petition the shareholders' meeting to remove any director who is in a position of conflict of interest. I am hereby moving this motion and calling for a vote by the directors present." Silence settled over the boardroom for a few beats. The institutional shareholder representatives bowed their heads, flipping through the documents, exchanging glances. Dominic had not spoken a single word from start to finish. He leaned back in his chair, the index finger of his right hand tapping rhythmically on the tabletop. No emotion could be read from it. Sarah spoke again, and this time her tone softened, taking on a pained, almost motherly cadence. "Let me speak candidly. Mr. Adler's professional capabilities are evident to all. The $100 billion deal was his achievement. But rules are rules. Corporate governance cannot be conducted on the basis of personal sentiment. If we bend the rules now, who will respect them going forward? A masterful performance. If it weren't for that flicker of smugness she couldn't quite suppress at the corner of her mouth, I might almost have believed her. I rose to my feet and adjusted the cuffs of my suit. Mrs. Whitmore is absolutely correct. In rules are rules, I said, meeting the eyes of every director around the table, my voice unhurried and even. However, before we proceed to a vote, I would ask everyone to review a document. I withdrew a thick, bound stack of A4 paper from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. 7 copies, 1 for each person. Sarah took her copy, flipped open the cover page, and the smile on her face froze solid. "What is this?" Her voice had changed pitch. "A guarantee agreement." I sat back down, folding my hands on the table, my tone as flat as if I were discussing the weather. 3 years ago, Whitmore Industries, the company run by your father, Charles Whitmore, suffered a failed overseas investment that placed its capital chain in critical condition. At that time, Whitmore Industries required an emergency loan of $2 billion from the banks to survive. However, given the state of Whitmore Industries' assets at that time, no bank was willing to underwrite the loan. They required a third-party guarantor. I paused. Sarah's face had gone from ashen to a deathly white. "So you came to me," I continued. "You said, Adler, my father's side really can't hold on any longer. Could you use Cross International's name to provide a guarantee for my father? I told you explicitly at the time, this is non-compliant. Cross International is a publicly listed company. Any major external guarantee requires board approval." "You're lying." Sarah's voice went shrill. "I never. This agreement bears your handwritten signature and the official seal of Cross International." I cut her off, pointing to the final page of the document. "Guarantee amount, $2 billion. Guarantor, Cross International Group. Guaranteed party, Whitmore Industries. Date of signing, November 18th, 3 years ago." "Mrs. Whitmore, you should still remember that day, shouldn't you?" Sarah's lips were trembling violently. She stared down at the photocopied agreement, her fingers gripping the edges of the paper so tightly they crumpled. "This agreement was never presented to the board." My voice remained low, but every word landed with sharp clarity in every corner of the boardroom. Under SEC regulations, any external guarantee exceeding 10% of net assets must be approved by a 2/3 supermajority of the board and must be publicly disclosed. Mrs. Whitmore bypassed the board entirely 3 years ago and signed this agreement. She has concealed it for 3 full years. What would you call this? I turned to face the legal department representative. The legal department representative pushed up his glasses, his voice as dry as sandpaper. "This would constitute unauthorized guarantee issuance if the facts are as stated." "Not if," I said. "Harold, please pull up the filing from the government registry." Harold rose and activated the projector. On the screen appeared a scanned copy of an official business registry record, the record of Whitmore Industries' equity pledge from 3 years ago. The guarantor listed on that pledge was unmistakably Cross International Group. The boardroom erupted. The faces of all 3 institutional shareholder representatives changed simultaneously. The legal counsel from one of the firms actually stood up, leaned closer to the screen for a better look, then turned and whispered urgently into his representative's ear. "Adler!" Insera shot to her feet, her chair shooting backward and slamming into the wall with a dull thud. "You dare, Mrs. Whitmore." I remained seated, motionless, looking up at her with a gaze as calm as a deep pool. "You are currently seeking to remove me from my board seat. By that same token, I can petition the board to pursue legal accountability for your unauthorized execution of an external guarantee 3 years ago. Under federal law, if an unauthorized guarantee by a publicly listed company results in significant financial loss, the responsible parties may face criminal liability." In as if all the strength had been drained from her body, Sarah collapsed heavily back into her chair. Her makeup, at this moment, had completely lost its ability to mask anything. The raw, bone-deep terror now contorted her entire face. No one in the boardroom spoke. Dominic's finger continued tapping the table, rhythmically, unhurriedly. He had not said a word from beginning to end. Fellow directors, I rose and straightened my suit. Regarding the motion proposed by Mrs. Whitmore to remove my board seat, I believe no further discussion is necessary. The three institutional shareholder representatives shook their heads almost in unison. The eldest among them, Warren Haynes, managing partner of Summit Capital, removed his reading glasses, looked at Sarah, then at me, and let out a heavy sigh. Mr. Adler, this matter of the guarantee agreement, Summit had absolutely no prior knowledge of it. The severity of this is extraordinary. We will need to reassess the governance risk profile of Cross International. Of course, I nodded. But before any reassessment begins, I have one final word to add. I walked to the head of the conference table, standing beside Dominic, and faced all the directors. The growth in Cross International's performance over the past 3 years is visible to everyone here. The $100 billion deal is merely one example. What I, Lucas Adler, have invested in this company is not just 3 years of my youth, but also a genuine cash-backed 30% equity stake. I did all of this because I believed in this company. But a good company cannot withstand a broken governance structure. I paused. The actions of Mrs. Sarah Whitmore signing an unauthorized guarantee agreement 3 years ago, along with a recent string of improper operational decisions including, but not limited to, dispersing $2 million in company funds under false pretenses to unqualified individuals, have created a material governance risk for Cross International Group, and as the largest shareholder, I hereby move that the board initiate the process to remove Sarah Whitmore from her position as executive director. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes rimmed red. Adler, don't you dare! I am not asking for your opinion, I said, not even glancing at her. I am petitioning the board for a vote. Dominic's finger finally ceased its tapping on the table. He stood up. He looked around at the directors present, silent for a long beat. Then he spoke one sentence. As chairman, I second Mr. Adler's motion. 3 days after Sarah was stripped of her executive director title, the old patriarch of the Whitmore family, Charles Whitmore, called me personally. The call came at 7 in the morning. I was standing in my kitchen waiting for the coffee maker to finish its cycle. When the screen lit up and the name on the caller ID registered, I froze for a beat. Charles Whitmore, in an old warhorse who had navigated the California business world for 4 decades, founder of Whitmore Industries, Sarah's father. In his retirement, the old man lived in deep seclusion and almost never appeared publicly. The number of things in the entire West Coast that could make him pick up the phone personally could be counted on one hand. I answered. Before I could say a word, Charles's voice came through first, not too loud, not too low, unhurried, carrying a steadiness that had been polished smooth by time. It betrayed no detectable emotion whatsoever. Adler, if it's convenient, come by the Whitmore estate this morning. It wasn't a request, and it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The old man's style. All right, I said. What time? 10 o'clock. I hung up, finished my coffee, and changed into a charcoal grey suit. Before walking out, I paused to think, then retrieved a document from my safe and placed it in my briefcase. It was something I had begun preparing the very day the board meeting ended, originally intended to be used depending on how the Whitmore family decided to play their hand. I hadn't expected Charles to move so quickly. The Whitmore estate lay deep within a redwood-lined avenue in the Bay Area. It was the kind of century-old Spanish-style villa cream-colored exterior walls, red-tiled roof, wrought iron gates, and 2 towering coastal oaks in the courtyard, each over 100 years old. I rang the bell at exactly 10 o'clock. The old butler answered the gate and led me through a long corridor paved with patterned tiles into a study at the rear of the house. Charles sat behind his desk. His hair had gone completely white, but his eyes were still a businessman's eyes, a sharp gleam hidden within their depths, as if he were weighing you the moment he looked at you. On the sofa beside him sat Sarah, dressed in a plain cashmere sweater, her face bare of makeup. Her eyes were red and heavily swollen. She had clearly done a great deal of crying over the past few days. When she saw me walk in, the corner of her mouth turned downward. She didn't speak. She simply turned her face away. "Sit," Charles gestured to the chair opposite him. "Coffee or tea?" "Coffee," I said. The old butler brought in 2 cups of pour-over coffee, the aroma rich and full-bodied. Charles picked up his cup, blew softly at the steam rising from the surface, took a sip, and only then spoke, unhurriedly. "Adler, you've been at Cross International for 3 years. I've heard quite a few things about you." He set down his cup and folded his hands on his knee. "When Dominic recruited you back then, I said one thing to him. Inez said, 'This man has too much ambition. Used well, he's a blade. Used poorly, he'll cut your own hand.' It appears I was not wrong. Mr. Whitmore flatters me." I took a sip of my own coffee. "I have never been a blade. In a blade is something held and wielded by someone else's hand. At best, I'm a man who plays chess." Charles looked at me. A faint, barely perceptible smile touched his lips, so faint it barely existed, yet it made my heart tighten. This old man was 10,000 times more difficult to deal with than Sarah. "Fine. Young men with a bit of fire are a good thing," Charles said slowly. "I didn't invite you here today to rehash old grievances. That guarantee agreement you produced at the board meeting certainly caught the Whitmore family off guard. But in business, there are no permanent enemies. Today, I want to discuss a transaction with you." "I'm listening. That 30% equity you hold in Cross International, at today's market price, it's worth roughly $50 billion. The Whitmore family is offering a flat sum, $60 billion, a full buyout. You take the money, go wherever you wish, do whatever you want. The condition, you return the original copy of that guarantee agreement to the Whitmore family, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Everything that happened at the board meeting ends here. $60 billion, $10 billion above market value. When the old man made a move, it was on a different scale entirely. Sarah only knew how to humiliate someone with $800. Her father was willing to spend an extra $10 billion just to buy a clean slate. That was the difference in caliber. I was silent for a moment, my finger tracing slowly along the rim of my coffee cup. "Mr. Whitmore, the terms are extremely attractive, but I have one question." "Ask. That emergency loan of $2 billion that Whitmore Industries took out 3 years ago, it still hasn't been fully repaid, has it? As far as I'm aware, the repayment deadline for that loan is next month. Principal of $2 billion plus 5 years of accrued interest comes to nearly $3 billion. The current liquid capital on Whitmore Industries' books is, by my estimate, less than $1 billion. May I ask where this $60 billion is going to come from?" The smile on Charles's face didn't waver, but the hand holding his coffee cup paused, almost imperceptibly. Just that one pause. I caught it. "The matter of funding is not something you need to concern yourself with." Charles set his cup down. "If the Whitmore family can make this offer, we can produce the money. I have no doubt the Whitmore family can produce it." I nodded. "But you said this is a transaction, and in a transaction, information should be symmetrical on both sides. Let me venture a guess. You intend to use the 8% stake that Whitmore Industries holds in Cross International as collateral to secure a bridge loan from the bank? Or perhaps quickly liquidate a few parcels of land under Whitmore Industries to free up cash?" Charles said nothing. He just looked at me. In there was now an added layer of scrutiny in those shrewd eyes, the look of a man re-evaluating an opponent he had previously underestimated. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not selling." I set my coffee cup down and stood up. "It's not a question of price. It's that I don't need this money. Your daughter has always believed I was some broke corporate drone. Justin believed it too. That's why they dared to throw $800 in my face. Surely you weren't under the impression that I'm a man short on funds." Charles was silent for a very long time. The grandfather clock in the study continued its steady ticking, each click hammering against Sarah's already frayed nerves. "Since you won't sell," Charles finally spoke, his tone still unhurried, "then the Whitmore family will simply have to resolve this matter through other means. I await it at any time." Inez stood, adjusted my suit, offered Charles a slight nod of courtesy, and turned to leave. As I passed Sarah, she didn't look up. but I saw her hand clutching the sofa cushion, her knuckles so white they were nearly translucent. The moment I stepped through the gates of the Whitmore estate, sunlight streamed down through the leaves of the coastal oaks, dappling the stone path in patches of light and shadow. I pulled out my phone and texted Tony, "Release the contracts for those 3 clients we've been sitting on." 3 seconds later, Tony replied, "Lucas, those 3 contracts are literally the last 3 big accounts we have in hand. Once we let them go, they're gone. You sure?"
"I'm sure,"
I typed. "Not only are we going to release them, we're going to make sure the Whitmore family believes they snatched them from us." There was silence from Tony's end for about a minute. Then he replied with 4 words, "Understood," in loud and clear. I pocketed my phone and drove away from the Whitmore estate. In the rearview mirror, the cream-colored villa shrank into the distance, finally vanishing entirely behind a curtain of emerald redwoods. Charles moved even faster than I had anticipated. Within 3 days, the investment arm of Whitmore Industries made its move, suddenly snatching away my 3 largest clients with offers priced 20% above market. 1 in the south, 2 in the east, all of them bedrock accounts that Cross International had cultivated for years. The combined contract value was close to $8 billion. The Whitmore family had swept them all up in one fell swoop. When the news broke, the inside of Cross International detonated. Several of my veteran salespeople who had followed me for years showed up at my doorstep, so agitated their eyes had gone red. Tony spent half an hour cursing over the phone, saying the Whitmore family had gone too damn far, saying, "Lucas, just say the word, and the brothers will walk out with you. We'll start our own company." I told them to stay calm. Insura, on the other hand, was positively thrilled. She posted a status on social media, no image, just a single line of text. Some people think becoming a major shareholder means they can dominate everything. In Pity, the business world only values ability, not ownership percentages. The first person to like that post was Justin Caldwell. When Harold called me, his voice was hesitant, caught between words. "Mr. Adler, you're aware that the Whitmore family poached those 3 clients at a premium? There are now voices inside the company saying you were so focused on fighting with Mrs. Whitmore that you let the company's business get damaged in the crossfire." "Harold," I cut him off, "do me a favor, look into something for me." The Whitmore family quoted 20% above market to snatch those 3 clients. Contract value $80 billion. That means the Whitmore family had to swallow nearly $16 billion in overpayment. Add on the performance bonds and advance payments they had to put up before even closing those deals. And the Whitmore family has sunk at least $25 billion in cash into this one campaign. Now check for me. How much liquid capital is currently left on Whitmore Industries' books? Harold fell silent on the other end of the line. Then his voice suddenly shifted register. In a repressible shock came through the receiver with unmistakable clarity. "Mr. Adler, you did this deliberately from the very beginning? Those 3 clients." "Of course I did it deliberately," I said. "Charles thinks he's snatching cards from my hand. In reality, every single card I fed him is a death sentence. $25 billion in cash, sunk. Next month, when that $3 billion loan comes due, what exactly is he going to use to pay it back?" Silence stretched over the line for a good 10 seconds. Then Harold spoke, his voice carrying something close to reverence. "Mr. Adler, the Whitmore family has taken the bait." "They've taken the bait," I repeated. "It's time to reel in the net." The Whitmore family's capital chain snapped far faster than anyone had anticipated. In less than 20 days after seizing those 3 major clients, cracks began spidering through the Whitmore Industries funding pipeline. It started with the Southern Project. The Whitmore family had promised the client a delivery timeline that was flatly impossible just to win the contract. When the deadline hit and they couldn't deliver, the client immediately fired off a lawyer's letter demanding penalty compensation. Then came the 2 Eastern accounts. To scrape together the advance payments they'd committed to, Whitmore Industries had siphoned every drop of liquid capital from 3 of its subsidiaries, bringing their daily operations to a grinding halt. Suppliers went unpaid. Workers stopped working. Creditors began lining up at the door. Dominoes, one tile fell, and the entire chain collapsed. When Harold called me, his voice was shaking. Mr. Adler, Whitmore Industries, applied to the bank for an emergency bridge loan this morning. It was rejected. Rejection was inevitable, I said, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of my study, watching the sky outside deepen into dusk. How much is left on their books? Less than 300 million, Harold said. But the loan coming due on the 5th of next month is 3 billion. Add penalties and interest, and they'll need roughly 3.2 billion just to square the books. Charles has already started liquidating assets. He listed his beachfront villa yesterday, asking 600 million so far, no takers. 600 million won't fill a $3.2 billion hole, I said. Keep watching. I hung up and opened my laptop, pulling up the ownership structure chart of Whitmore Industries. I had spent nearly a month assembling it. Charles Whitmore personally held 38%, Sarah held 13%. The Whitmore family controlled another 21% through a Cayman Islands offshore company. The remaining shares were scattered among a few institutions and retail investors. The key was that Cayman company. 3 years ago, to secure that $2 billion emergency loan, Charles had pledged 100% of that Cayman company's equity as collateral to the lending bank. If Whitmore Industries failed to repay the loan by the 5th of next month, the bank had the legal right to dispose of the pledged asset, which was, in effect, that 21% stake in Whitmore Industries held by the Cayman entity. And I had already spoken with the people at that bank. The manager of the bank's asset disposition department was a man named Andrew Milzer, cautious, clear-headed professional in his 40s. I had met with him twice. The first time was 2 weeks ago, when I invited him for coffee in my capacity as a shareholder of Cross International. We talked about market conditions for 2 hours. The second time was a week ago, in Mills. I had said during that second meeting, getting straight to the point, if Whitmore Industries defaults upon maturity and the pledged equity in that Cayman company needs to be disposed of, I would like to be the first prospective buyer notified. I showed him, directly, an asset verification statement, apart from my Cross International equity. I held over $500 million in liquid assets in offshore accounts. Mr. Andrew had held his coffee and studied me for a solid 5 seconds. Then he smiled. Mr. Adler, you've been setting this board for a long time, haven't you? I simply don't like fighting unprepared battles. Andrew hadn't given me a firm commitment on the spot. But 3 days ago, he had sent me a messenger, single line, should a default occur, priority disposition rights can be negotiated. That was enough. The day Whitmore Industries defaulted came even sooner than anyone had predicted. 10 days before the repayment deadline, Whitmore Industries' capital chain shattered completely. Suppliers to the 3 subsidiaries filed a joint lawsuit, and the court froze all of Whitmore Industries' bank accounts in the western region. Once that chain reaction ignited, several creditors who had been watching from the sidelines immediately turned hostile, filing simultaneous applications for asset preservation with the court. Charles now couldn't even liquidate his assets if he wanted. Everything that could be sold had been frozen. Even the Whitmore estate itself was on the frozen asset list. On the day of the repayment deadline, Whitmore Industries formally defaulted. When the news broke, the entire West Coast business community exploded. The Whitmore family had dominated these circles for 20 years. Nothing like this had ever happened. In his youth, Charles had built a small workshop into a $100 billion industrial conglomerate through sheer grit. He was a legend on the lips of every old guard businessman. No one had imagined that this legend would crumble in a cash flow crisis that had lasted less than 20 days. And on the afternoon the bank formally initiated the disposition process for the pledged equity, submitted my acquisition offer. My capacity, largest shareholder of Cross International Group. The acquisition target, 100% equity of that Cayman company, corresponding to a 21% stake in Whitmore Industries. The offer price, $1.5 billion in cash, lump sum payment. When Andrew called me, his voice carried the tone of a man saying, "I knew it all along. Mr. Adler, your offer isn't the highest. Someone else bid $1.8 billion. But your payment terms are the strongest," Andrew said. "All cash, no financing approval required, funds to settle within 3 days. What the bank needs most right now isn't the highest bidder, it's the fastest one. Congratulations, the disposition committee just approved it. I hung up the phone and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of my study, watching the night slowly descend like a curtain. The city lights flickered in the distance. Traffic on the overpasses drew long ribbons of light. The entire world continued to churn forward in its orderly fashion. Only the Whitmore family, the family that had strutted before me with unchecked arrogance for 3 full years, was quietly, piece by piece, crumbling into dust. On the morning the acquisition agreement was signed, I went to the bank's headquarters building. The signing took less than 10 minutes. Exchange documents, stamp, handshake. When Andrew handed me the dossier containing the full documentation of the Cayman Company, he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Adler, if you'll allow me to speak out of turn, that battle you fought at Cross International, it was beautifully executed. It's not over yet." Holding the dossier, I walked out of the bank's entrance. My phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but the moment I picked up and heard the first syllable, I knew exactly who was on the other end. Sarah Whitmore. She wasn't crying, but her voice was worse than crying. It was the kind of hoarseness that doesn't come from weeping, it comes from a person standing at the very edge of total collapse, forcing herself to speak. Dry, trembling, broken into fragments. "Adler," she said, "I know you've acquired 21% of Whitmore Industries. Combined with the float you can sweep up on the open market, you can directly control Whitmore Industries now. 3 generations of Whitmore legacy, all of it, now, clenched in your one hand. So." There was silence on the other end for a very long time. So long that I thought she had hung up. Then Sarah spoke again. Her voice was so low it was barely audible. "Can I see you? Face to face. Anything you have to say can be said over the phone." "No." Her voice suddenly turned urgent. "I need to say this to you in person. Where are you? I'll come to you." Inai gave her an address. Not my home, but a cafe I frequented. 20 minutes later, Sarah appeared at the cafe entrance. I almost didn't recognize her. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a careless ponytail. She was dressed in a faded grey hoodie and black sweatpants, with flat canvas sneakers on her feet. Compared to the woman who, just 2 weeks ago, had stood in 12-centimeter stilettos and thrown $800 at my feet, the CEO's wife in all her glory, she was unrecognizable. She walked into the private booth and stood in front of me for 2 seconds. Then her knees buckled. She knelt directly in front of me. The sound of her knees hitting the hardwood floor was muffled but heavy. The entire booth seemed to shudder with it. A cafe server, arriving with coffee, caught sight of the scene, jumped in shock, and hurriedly retreated, pulling the door shut. "Adler." Sarah knelt on the floor, looking up at me. Her eyes were so red it looked as if she hadn't closed them in days. "Please, let the Whitmore family go. I didn't move. I looked down at her. My father is 67 years old." Her voice shook uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face, soaking the collar of her faded grey hoodie in a dark, spreading stain. "His entire life's work is Whitmore Industries. If Whitmore Industries falls under your control, he won't survive it. His blood pressure spiked to 200 yesterday. They rushed him to the hospital and spent 4 hours in the ER before he stabilized. The doctors said one more episode like that, and they won't be able to bring him back." "Sarah," I said, leaning back in my chair, my voice very calm, "do you still remember how you treated me at the celebration banquet 3 weeks ago?" She froze, her mouth opened, but no words came out. "When you threw that $800 on the ground in front of me, did it ever cross your mind that a day like today would come?" I asked her. "When you called me up and told me to go be a security guard in your parking lot, did you ever imagine a day like today? When you sixed Justin and his private investigator on me, did you ever think about a day like today? When you had Charles deploy Whitmore family capital to steal my clients, to squeeze me out, did it ever even once occur to you that a day like today would come?" With each question I asked, Sarah's body seemed to collapse further into itself. By the end, she was practically slumped on the floor, hands braced against the wood, her shoulders heaving violently but making no sound at all. "You're begging me to let the Whitmore family go." I picked up my coffee cup from the table and took an unhurried sip. "Then tell me, Why should I? In everything the Whitmore family has done to me over these 3 years, is there a single thing among them that merits my mercy? Sarah knelt on the floor. Tears fell in heavy drops onto the hardwood, blooming into dark, round stains. She opened her mouth several times. Finally, she squeezed out a sentence. "I'll do anything." Her voice was so hoarse it was barely intelligible. "As long as you let Whitmore Industries go, I'll do anything." Sarah knelt on the floor before me, tears soaking a wide, dark stain into the collar of her grey hoodie, her shoulders shaking like leaves in a storm. The cafe's private booth was so quiet the only sound was her stifled, hitching sobs. Outside the window, a car passed on the street occasionally, its headlights sweeping across the curtains and quickly fading. "I'll do anything." Her voice was so hoarse it sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. "As long as you let Whitmore Industries go, I'll do anything." I held my coffee cup and looked down at her. If someone had told me 3 weeks ago that Sarah Whitmore would be kneeling at my feet begging for mercy, I would have thought they were insane. But here she was, kneeling on the hard wooden floor, her face stripped of every trace of makeup, the bags under her eyes so heavy it looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You say you'll do anything." I set my coffee cup down and folded my hands on my knee. "Then I'll ask you one thing. That $84, $2 million in embezzled funds. Where exactly did Justin transfer it?" Sarah's body visibly stiffened. I don't know." She kept her head lowered, her voice trembling. "Dominic is already investigating. I really don't know where Justin moved the money." "Sarah?" I cut her off, and my tone wasn't heavy, but each word carried an unassailable certainty. "Say that you don't know one more time." She raised her head. In her swollen eyes a flash of panic darted. It wasn't the panic of an innocent person wrongly accused. It was the instinctive, raw terror of someone whose secrets had just been laid bare. I had seen that expression too many times across negotiating tables, the look that flashes across someone's face when you point directly at the clause they were trying to bury. It was unmistakable. 3 weeks ago, the night the board stripped you of your executive director title, I reached into my suit's inner pocket, pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. You and Justin had a 20-minute conversation in the fire stairwell on the 48th floor of Cross International Tower. You probably assumed there was no surveillance there. Sarah's face drained of blood in an instant, whiter even than when she had knelt down to beg, not the pallor of missing color, but the dead white of every drop of blood evacuating a face all at once. "How did you?" I didn't answer her. I tapped an audio file on my phone and pressed play. Inzira's voice emerged from the phone speaker. Despite the slight ambient echo, every single word was crystal clear. "The money's already been moved to that shell company in the Caymans. The domestic books can't trace it." "What about your father's side? Is everything ready?" Then Justin's voice. "Mr. Charles says, give him 2 more weeks. He's going to inflate the valuation on a few parcels of land under Whitmore Industries, sell them off, pool that with the $84, $2 million, and get a full billion into your Swiss account." "1 billion isn't enough." Sarah's voice on the recording was ice cold and calculating, completely unrecognizable from the trembling woman kneeling on the floor now. "Adler's 30% plus Dominic's 26%. If those two join forces, I won't be able to walk away from Cross International with a single cent. We have to move everything under my name that can be moved before Dominic catches on, including those Whitmore Industries land parcels. Liquidate everything you can fast." "Your father's side is solid? I mean, Mr. Charles is the founder of Whitmore Industries. If he figures out you're planning to strip Whitmore Industries' assets too, my father's side you don't need to worry about. His health is failing. His mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. I tell him what to think, and he believes it. This whole move to steal Adler's clients, that was me telling him to strike. He still thinks it's about defending the Whitmore family's honor." A few seconds of silence, then Justin's low chuckle. "Sarah, you're cold as ice, scheming against your own father." "If I don't scheme, am I supposed to wait for Dominic to discover I've been running a parallel set of books behind his back? Remember this, the Cayman Company is under my name. You're just the nominee holder. Once all the money is out, we go to Switzerland together. No matter how capable Dominic is, he can't reach us there." The recording stopped. The private booth was silent as a tomb. Sarah knelt on the floor, every inch of her body shaking violently. Her lips trembled so hard she couldn't form a single complete syllable. She stared at me as if I were a ghost that had crawled up from beneath the ground. This recording, I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward her, was made 3 weeks ago. You and Justin apparently forgot. The fire stairwell on the 48th floor of Cross International Tower doesn't have surveillance cameras. But before I resigned, in my capacity as a shareholder, I had security install 3 concealed audio pickups on that floor. Originally, it was to guard against corporate espionage. I didn't expect to capture this first. You've been... Insara's voice came out like beads falling off a snapped string, each syllable dropping and breaking apart, unable to string together. I've been waiting. I tucked my phone back into my suit, waiting for you to play every single card in your hand, then letting you see with your own eyes that from start to finish, you've been inside my game. The day of the celebration banquet, when you threw $800 at me to humiliate me, you thought I was just a disposable employee you could crush at will. What you didn't know was that I had already had this recording in my possession for a full month before that banquet. Sarah's tears surged again, but this time, no sound came out. Her mouth hung open, her throat producing a dry, rasping, sob-like wheeze. She slumped onto the floor like a cotton doll that had been hollowed out. I will publicly play this recording tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the full executive meeting of Cross International Group. I stood up and looked down at her. Whether Dominic listens all the way through, and what he does after he hears it, those are not within my control. But you came here today and asked me to let the Whitmore family go. I walked to the door of the booth and placed my hand on the handle. I turned my head and gave her one final look. Sarah, search your conscience. Of everything you've done in these 3 years, is there a single thing that merits me letting you go? I pulled open the door and walked out. Behind me came the sound of Sarah's soul-rending hysterical sobs. The sound tore through the cafe's corridor and startled the patrons on the lower floor. But no one came upstairs, and no one stopped me. The following morning, at 10 a.m., the full executive meeting of Cross International Group was convened in the largest conference room on the 48th floor. Present were not only every department head at director level and above, but also the authorized representatives of the 3 institutional shareholders. The conference room was packed to capacity. Even the extra chairs lining the walls were fully occupied. Everyone knew today's meeting was different. Dominic himself had posted the notification in the executive group chat. The wording had been brutally succinct, just 2 lines: all senior management must attend, no excused absences. Dominic sat at the head of the long conference table, his suit crisp and immaculate, his face looked like a sheet of frozen iron. Insara sat at his right hand, dressed in a plain black suit. She had applied very light makeup, but no amount of makeup could conceal the pallor of her face. Her fingers were clenched tightly around the edge of the conference table, her nails digging into the wood, her knuckles white-blue. Justin was not present. He had been unreachable for the past 3 days. His phone was disconnected. His apartment lease had been terminated. Even Sarah had no idea where he was. Everyone, I rose and walked to the projector screen at the front of the conference room. I've asked you all here today to listen to a recording. Before I play it, let me state this clearly. The original file of this recording has already been notarized and legally preserved as evidence. The corresponding forensic authentication report is also complete and can be submitted as legal evidence at any time. Sarah's head snapped up to look at me. The fear in her eyes was nearly spilling over. She turned to Dominic, her lips moving as if she wanted to say something, but Dominic wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on me throughout, calm, restrained, betraying not a single emotion. I pressed play. Insara's voice and Justin's voice flooded the conference room from every speaker. So clear it was as if they were standing right there in the room speaking. The money's already been moved to that shell company in the Caymans. Inflate the valuation on a few parcels of land under Whitmore Industries. Sell them off. The Cayman company is under my name. You're just the nominee holder. Once all the money is out, we go to Switzerland together. The recording played for nearly 4 full minutes. In that conference room, no one made a single sound. Even breathing was suppressed to its absolute minimum. Over 40 senior executives sat in their seats. Some had bowed their heads, unable to look at Dominic. Some were staring wide-eyed at Sarah. Some had let their jaws drop open, forgetting to close them. The recording ended. Another 10 seconds of silence stretched through the conference room. Then Dominic stood up. He didn't stand quickly, but the pressure radiating from him was so immense that the people sitting on either side of him instinctively leaned back. He walked over until he stood directly in front of Sarah and looked down at his wife. Sarah tilted her head up to meet his gaze. The expression on her face was that of a deer caught in the blinding glare of headlights. Her lips quivered. Tears welled in her eyes, but not a single word could come out. 8 years. Dominic's voice was very soft, so soft only those in the front rows could hear. For 8 years I cleaned up your messes. You stuffed the company with your people. Inni didn't interfere. You rubber-stamped money that should never have been approved. I didn't interfere. You publicly humiliated the company's largest shareholder at the celebration banquet. I didn't even lose my temper on the spot. I thought you were merely spoiled, that your father had simply indulged you too much. He paused. His right hand reached into his suit's inner pocket. He pulled out a fountain pen. But you were prepared to hollow out even your own family's company, to sell off your own father's land just to fund your escape. Sarah, you're not just spoiled, you are rotten to the core. He uncapped the pen. From Harold's hands, he took a document and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. It was a printed divorce agreement. The terms and clauses ran densely across 2 full pages. "Sign," Dominic said. "Now!" Sarah looked down at the agreement. Her entire body began to tremble like chaff in a sieve. She grabbed Dominic's sleeve. The tears finally broke free, her whole face contorting. "Dominic, please listen to me. It's Adler framing me. That recording is fake. Please believe me. Sign." Dominic pressed the fountain pen into her hand. His voice was cold as a blade. "Don't make me say it a 3rd time." The hand holding the pen shook so violently she could barely grip the barrel. She looked down at the agreement. Tears splattered onto the paper in heavy drops, blurring the ink in several places. She tried several times but could not produce a single complete stroke of the pen. In the end, Harold had to hold the paper steady for her before she could scratch out her name, crooked and barely legible across the signature line. In the moment the last stroke of her pen fell, Sarah flung the fountain pen away. She buried her face in both hands and let out a long, soul-tearing, guttural wail. That sound echoed through the 48th floor conference room and sent a chill seeping from the bones of everyone present. Dominic picked up the signed agreement. He turned and walked over to me. "Adler," he said, "effective today, I'm no longer serving as CEO of Cross International Group. Chairman of the board, I will remain. The CEO position, do you want it?" I looked at him. I didn't answer immediately. Every gaze in the conference room was fixed on me. Those senior executives who had lowered their heads in silence when Sarah threw $800 at me now sat bolt upright, one more rigidly than the next. The awe in their eyes couldn't be hidden. "Yes," I said. Dominic nodded. He extended his hand. I clasped it. The moment our 2 hands met, a muffled thud came from the corner of the conference room. Sarah had slipped from her chair to the floor. No one moved to help her. 1 month later, I formally moved into the CEO's office of Cross International Group. The very first document I signed on my first day was the full allocation plan for the bonus payout of the $100 billion deal. The 13 project team members of the marketing department were awarded bonuses proportional to their actual contribution. The lowest received $800,000. The highest, Tony Fisher, received $3 million. On the afternoon, finance emailed the bonus breakdown to everyone's inbox. A few of the old brothers from marketing stormed my new office and sprayed a bottle of champagne directly onto the ceiling. Tony wiped champagne foam off his face and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Lucas, you know what they're calling you in the industry now? The new king of Cross, from a director kicked out of the company to CEO in 3 weeks. Nothing like this has happened in the West Coast business world in 30 years. Less bootlicking." I set down my champagne flute and pulled a delicate velvet box from my drawer. "I need you to handle something for me." Tony took it and opened it. Inside was a custom-made crystal photo frame. The craftsmanship was exquisite. The border was plated in pure gold. The crystal glass on the front was a full centimeter thick, refracting rainbow-colored prisms under the office lights. Inside the frame were 8 crisp $100 bills, arranged in a perfect fan. The exact same $800 that Sarah had thrown at my feet on the floor of the celebration banquet 3 months ago. And beside them was an empty slot. Inside that slot were tucked 2 photocopied documents bearing the red official seals of the court. One was a copy of a criminal indictment. The defendant, Sarah Whitmore. Charges: misappropriation of corporate funds, unauthorized issuance of guarantees, transfer of corporate assets, and multiple additional counts. The other was for Justin Caldwell. Charges: misappropriation of corporate funds and embezzlement. Take this to the Whitmore estate, I said. Deliver it to Sarah personally. Tony looked down at the contents of that gilded frame. He was silent for a long moment. When he looked up at me, his eyes had changed. Lucas, you really hold a grudge, don't you? It's not a grudge. I leaned back in my chair and gazed out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city skyline stretching beneath Cross International Tower. It's about making sure people understand. Some accounts, sooner or later, come due. Tony drove to the Whitmore estate personally. Later, he described the scene to me. The gates of the Whitmore estate were shut tight. He rang the bell for ages before anyone came. The person who answered was the Whitmore family's old butler. His hair seemed to have turned half white in 3 months. His back was more stooped. He stared for a long time before recognizing Tony as someone from Cross International. In the courtyard of the estate, the 200-year-old coastal oaks still stood, but their golden leaves had fallen and lay thick across the entire stone path. No one had swept them. Charles was still in the hospital. After Whitmore Industries was acquired by Cross International, the old man's hypertension had flared repeatedly. The doctors said the prognosis was not good. The vast Whitmore estate was now inhabited by Sarah alone. Even the housekeeper had been let go. Only the old butler came by once a day to deliver a meal. When Tony walked into the living room, Sarah was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in an old blanket, staring blankly at the TV. She was likely absorbing absolutely nothing of what was playing on the screen. Her eyes were fixed and motionless. She had become gaunt to the point of emaciation. Her cheekbones jutted out sharply. Her eye sockets were deeply sunken. The body wrapped inside that blanket looked a full size smaller than it had 3 months ago. Mrs. Whitmore. Tony placed the gilded frame on the coffee table. Lucas asked me to deliver this to you personally. Sarah's gaze dropped to the crystal frame. She saw the $800 bills arranged inside, and the 2 court summonses tucked beside them. For about 3 seconds she was utterly frozen. Then her expression began to crack, inch by inch, from blankness to shock, from shock to terror, from terror to a complete, bone-deep, total collapse. She reached out a hand to pick up the frame, but her fingers trembled so violently that they brushed against the edge of the frame but couldn't manage to grasp it. The crystal glass reflected her face back at her twisted, ghastly pale, utterly despairing. She was utterly unrecognizable from the woman who, 3 months ago, had stood on that banquet stage in a champagne-colored couture gown and disdainfully tossed $800 at my feet. Lucas, her voice scraped out of her throat, dry as 2 pieces of sandpaper grinding against each other. He won't even let go of $800. Lucas said. Tony stood straight, his tone strictly professional. This $800 is what you gave him back then. Now it's being returned to you, original and intact. Additionally, Lucas asked me to pass along one message. Tony paused. What message? Sarah looked up. Her eyes were so red it looked as if they might bleed. Lucas said, if $800 isn't enough, he'll personally attend the trial and see how much the court awards. Sarah's hand finally closed around the gilded frame. She held it in both hands, looking down at the 8 bills and the 2 court summonses. Her entire body began shaking violently, like a leaf in a hurricane. She lifted the frame as if to smash it to the ground, but halfway up, her hands froze in midair, because she had seen the small line of text engraved on the back of the frame. It was my handwriting, laser-etched into the pure gold border. Every character was clean and precise. To Sarah Whitmore, thank you for teaching me a lesson with your $800. In the world of business, the most expensive thing is never money. It's betting on the wrong side. That sound traveled out from the empty living room of the Whitmore estate, in across the stone path blanketed with decaying oak leaves, through the wrought iron gates that had been kept tightly shut for so many years, and finally dissipated into the cold November wind of the Bay Area. She clutched the frame to her chest and let out a long, ragged, soul-shattering wail. Tony turned and walked away. At the gate he glanced back. Insara was kneeling on the living room carpet, clutching the gilded frame tightly to her chest, her back bowed, her shoulders heaving violently, but no sound was coming out anymore. This old brother, who had followed me for 3 years, who had seen me battle opponents across the negotiating table, who had seen me pull all-nighters until dawn revising proposals, who had seen me hurl my resignation letter into Sarah's face at the celebration banquet, said that what he had just witnessed was more chilling than anything he had ever seen in his life. The old butler stood beneath the portico, watching Tony's retreating figure. He let out a long sigh. He said nothing at all. Outside the Whitmore estate gate, Tony crouched beneath a coastal oak and smoked a cigarette. Lucas, his voice when he called me, sounded a little subdued. Deliveries made. I'm going to say something I maybe shouldn't say. You're really going for the kill here. When she threw that $800 in my face, did she ever think about leaving herself a way out? I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the CEO's office, looking down at the endless stream of traffic below. When she signed off on that $84 million embezzlement for Justin, did she ever think about leaving herself a way out? When she planned to sell off her own family's land and flee to Switzerland, did she ever think about leaving her own father a way out? Tony was silent on the other end for a long time. Then he said, "Lucas, I'm starting to think you were playing a massive game of chess from the very beginning. Even that $800 at the banquet, was that part of your plan all along?" I didn't answer. Outside the window, the daylight had dimmed. The city's lights were flickering on, one by one. The Cross International logo atop the building rotated slowly in the night sky, casting its beam of light far, far into the distance. "Tony," I said, "come back. The board meeting is about to start. Today is the first board meeting I'm chairing in my capacity as CEO. There are 3 key proposals on the agenda. The first one is the formal launch of the full restructuring of Whitmore Industries. On my way." Tony's voice brightened again. "Oh, Lucas, there's an update on Justin. He was on the run in a dozen places. They finally caught him in a border town down south. The FBI guys said when they grabbed him, he was in a rental, burning fake passports. Half a day later, and he'd have been across the border." "Did he receive the court summons?" "He did. Collapsed right there on the spot. 2 agents had to hold him up to keep him from hitting the ground. Word is, he kept muttering one sentence over and over." "What sentence?" "He said, 'If I'd known Lucas Adler was this kind of man, I'd never have dared touch that $84 million, even if you put a gun to my head.'" I let out a short laugh and hung up the phone. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the entire city was lighting up in the early evening. I turned around, picked up the CEO appointment letter from the desk, and signed my name on the signature line. The moment the words Lucas Adler landed on the paper, the images of the past 3 months flashed through my mind, one by one. The $800 at the celebration banquet, the dead silence on the parking lot call, the guarantee agreement at the boardroom table, the negotiation in the study of the Whitmore estate, Sarah kneeling on the cafe floor, Dominic pressing the fountain pen into his wife's hand as she signed away her marriage. It was all over. Innie pressed the intercom on my desk. The voice of my secretary, Chloe Miller, came through the line. "Mr. Adler, what can I do for you?" "Notify all department heads. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. New CEO's first all-hands meeting. The agenda topic," I paused, "Cross International Group's next $100 billion strategy."